All right, so we're ready to move on now to utility functions with more than one good. And we're going to, again, keep using very simple functions for now to develop the tools before we move on to more complicated functions later. So here I've got a utility function with two goods, food and clothing, which is really very simple. Just food times clothing, easy enough. And I want to start to describe this utility function or this consumer's preferences. But to do that, particularly graphically, I need to get rid of one of the variables, right? Because now I have three variables. I have utility, food, and clothing. And I can't put that on a two-dimensional graph. So what we're going to do is we're going to hold utility constant and just graph combinations of food and clothing that give me a constant level of utility. And that is what we call an indifference curve, right? It describes points that you're indifferent between, that give you the same amount of happiness. So an indifference curve represents all the combinations of two goods that yield the same amount of utility. And in this example, we're going to hold utility constant at 100 and then think of different combinations of food and clothing that yield that 100 units of utility. Remember, we don't really care about what the number is, so I just picked that 100 arbitrarily because it'll give us some easy numbers. It could be 1,000, it could be 10,000, it could be 2, I don't know, right? The number doesn't matter, the cardinal utility doesn't matter. We're really just interested in ordinal utility, comparing different bundles to understand how consumers behave in certain situations. All right, so let's think about some different combinations of these goods that will give me a utility of 100. So just need numbers that multiply to equal 100. And that's pretty easy to think of here. And then I'll plot those on the graph to get a sense of what my curve will look like. All right, and you can see here we've got convex indifference curve. I'm going to label that U100. And I can find an equation for this curve by just taking my utility function and plugging in 100 for a utility, right? So utility on this line is always equal to 100. Now I've got my two consumption goods. I'm just going to solve for the y-axis consumption good, and I get this equation. So this is the equation of this particular indifference curve at utility of 100. And their generic formula for this function would be any quantity of utility, right, divided by f. All right, so I've got this indifference curve here, and I want to think about what the other points on the graph mean. So all the points along this indifference curve give me the same amount of utility, 100. And I know from monotonicity that if I get more of something, I'm going to have more utility, right? So if I say start at point A, say this is point A here, 10, 10, I have 10 units of food and 10 units of clothing. If I go up from here, I've got the same amount of food, but more clothing. Or if I go over where I have the same amount of clothing, but more food, this is the region where I have more of everything, right? More of everything is going to make me happier relative to point A, right? So all the points above the indifference curve will make you happier. All the points below the indifference curve will make you sadder. This region here, it has fewer of both goods, so you'll be clearly much sadder in this region. And the other two boxes are going to be split, right? Because in those situations, when I move over here or over here, I'm getting, say, more of one good, in this case, more clothing, but less food, right? So as I move to this box, right, in some cases I'll be happier and in some cases I'll be sadder. And you can tell just by looking at where we are relative to the indifference curve, right? Because I know that along that blue line, I'm just as happy as at point A. And so anything above that blue line is going to make me happier. And anything below that blue line is going to make me sadder. All right, so let's just write that out here. Right, that more of both goods always makes you happier, and vice versa. And all points above the indifference curve also make you happier.